Hey friends, Mike Myers here with the Songwriting for Guitar podcast, episode number 25, Michael Elsner. Now, Michael is an expert when it comes to music licensing. He has had over 2,000 placements. He has coached hundreds of songwriters and artists to actively get their music into film and television. We're going to talk about how does a songwriter start to actively get placements, where to go, because Michael has navigated those waters both in Nashville and LA, and he's going to share some of his experience, his thoughts on this process. So let's just dig into it. Episode number 25, Michael Elsner.
I had asked my mom for a keyboard maybe 2 or 3 years before, and I was probably 12, I guess, at the time. And so she was like, well, you haven't really even done much with your keyboard. And I doinked around on it and stuff. And so I made a deal with her that if I learn a bunch of these Beatles songs, I had like a Beatles songbook. If I learn a bunch of these Beatles songs on piano or keyboard, give me a guitar. So that was the deal. And so I did. And so then she got me a guitar for Christmas, and it really stemmed. What really started it though for me was, it's a funny story, but really it started with the cover of the Racer X Live Extreme Volume album. Paul Gilbert was playing this pink. It's called an Ice Stroyer. It's like an Iceman and a Destroyer combined. And I just thought that was the coolest looking guitar, and I got it, and the music was just insanity. And at that time in my life, it resonated with me. And so, of course, that was also in the late '80s, Bon Jovi era, the MTV era, and so guitar just looked like a lot of fun. So that's kind of how it started, and then I just became so passionate about it. Within that first year, I had learned so much, and I just got into, I guess I was in 8th grade. So a year later, I got into high school and started learning from a bunch of guys in high school. And very quickly, they've been playing longer than me, but very quickly, I just spent so much time playing and absorbing that, I quickly improved faster than expected. We'll say that. And that's kind of how it went. I just became obsessed with it, and I spent probably, during the high school years, probably a solid, 5-6 hours a day playing. During the summer, probably, 8 hours, if not more, just insanity. And that was also during the era of guys like, Eric Johnson, Paul Gilbert, maybe not John Petrucci quite yet, but, Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, George Lynch, the technicians. And those are the people that I got a guitar magazine every month, and, I would learn how to play the songs through the tab. And that's really how I learned. I would get those old REH videos, VHS videos, that were like $49.95 or whatever. I'd get one like every 3 months from the music store and just, watch them over and over and over and over.
I feel like it's not an interest, but this was like, it's cool that the guitar became like obsession.
Oh.
Like it was just like everything living, breathing moment, like guitar.
Yeah. And that's what's weird, the funny thing is that, in kind of the online space now in the last couple of years, people have gotten to know me because of licensing. But the funny thing is, so anytime I do like an interview or type of presentation or a speech, I'm always talking about licensing. Music licensing, but outside from that, anytime I'm hanging out with my friends or my close friends who I've known for a long time, or even obviously my family, it's they don't see me as a licensing guy. They all know me as a guitar player, and they come over to my studio and I just have walls of guitars, and that I love guitar, and I've been able to make a living at it through licensing, but guitar is like it's a crazy obsession for sure.
When you were taking guitar more and more seriously as you were getting older, did you think it was going to be a band that was going to be like, that's how I'm going to do music? Oh, I'm going to have a band.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there was no other way to do it. I wasn't a guy. But I was writing songs, and in high school, there was a good friend of mine who played bass and sang. And so, he would come over all the time, and we'd work on songs together, and started a band in high school, and, stayed with kind of the same core guys through high school. And then after high school, got into a different band, and then that band, actually did some stuff, and we were kind of on our way. And but it was always through a band. I got heavy into songwriting, but then when I was 16, I got a 4-track, an old cassette 4-track, and just became obsessed with that. And I remember like that's how I started learning how to record. And I had these really crappy microphones, and I'd stick it in front of my amp, and then you just couldn't figure out how to get a good sound. And then And then I read somewhere about a Rockman, an old Schultz Rockman. And so I remember there's a used music store that I ended up buying an old Rockman Sustainer, which is, for those who don't know, it was like the first, direct recording system. Like Def Leppard's Hysteria was recorded all direct through a Rockman. So a lot of ZZ Top, stuff like that, So it kind of gives you that Boston sound. And so I got into that. And once I actually had some good guitar tones, I went out and I bought a drum machine and mowed a lot of lawns. And every penny I made, I put back into, building this little recording setup. As much as I was obsessed with playing guitar, then I got really obsessed with recording and learning how to record. I started hanging out in different studios where I was growing up, and then that ultimately led to I had a choice at one point.
Mm-hmm.
I finally had a choice where I was like, okay, I could either go to music school or I could go to recording school, and I was so excited. I wanted to go to music school so bad for so long, and right around that time, I ended up hurting my hand. I ended up because I played so much. I ended up getting this thing called repetitive stress injury, RSI, where it inflames your tendons. And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but to give you some perspective, at the time I had an old Honda Prelude and a manual, so stick shift. And at the time, I couldn't even hold onto the steering wheel with my left hand when I needed to shift with my right. Because I went and saw like these surgeons and all types of stuff because it was so painful for me to even just hold on to anything with my left hand. So I thought my guitar career was done at 20. So I was really depressed, and then that's ultimately what led me to making a decision to go to a recording school. I ended up going to a recording school down in Florida because I thought, well, if I can't play guitar, I guess I'm going to produce records. And then, fortunately, while I was down there for a year to go to that school, my hand healed up, and never had a problem since.
But making the recording move, I feel, is so good. The fact that you did that, because to me, it's like guitar, recording, it goes hand in hand.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the more, especially now, probably even then, but like the more that you're kind of like a Swiss Army knife, that you can do a little bit of this, this. It's not necessary. It's great to be, amazing at one, but if you can be like, hey, I'm great at guitar. I also record. I also write songs. I can also produce. It's like all these other things.
Yeah.
So helpful.
Yeah, well, the recording, anytime you can create value, anytime you learn a skill and you can make it valuable to other people, you just open up more opportunities for you anyway. And recording to me, well, I loved it. I loved recording. And it's so funny because things now are so easy. And even then, like in the late 90s, things were easy compared to what they were in like the 70s and 80s, because now we had digital, I'd upgraded to a digital 8-track, so things were a lot easier. But I was so passionate about learning things. Like I remember there was a song at the time by REM. I think it was called What's the Frequency, Kenneth? And it had this like kind of choppy guitar. And I remembered, it's like happens in the chorus. It's like, what's the frequency, Kenneth? Blah, 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 whatever that line is. And then you hear this guitar part. Mm-hmm. And perfectly in time and stuff like that. And I still remember when I learned how to do that, when I learned that, oh, okay, I can take like a hi-hat from my drum machine. I can, you tap it out, tap it out, and then send the output of the hi-hat of the drum machine to I had a compressor gate system, an export, like a rack unit. I could send it to the key input of the gate, and I could then set the gate and then run my guitar through the gate, and that's going to create the sound. It was like this whole process, I mean, now it's like you hit a button and it does it, right? But it was this whole thing of getting cables and connecting everything, and there was something about that to me that was so much fun. I mean, now I love my studio and I love having everything there. But I'll be honest with you, I never go around the back of my system to connect or unplug anything. The only time I go around the back of my system is when I want to open up the curtains, because to my room, my studio here. But back then, like anytime you wanted to do something, you had to figure out how to do it, and then you generally had to connect stuff and piece things together. And I feel like there was just something great about that.
I feel like this carries over to so many things that you've done, just how you're like, oh, I'm really curious about this. And you try to understand every little step and every little process to to recreate and make it your own. It's almost like with songwriting, your licensing career, the classes that you've built, it kind of is like that REM guitar part. It's like, what the hell is happening? I
Yeah.
need to understand that and then
Yeah.
recreate it step by step.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of just listening to what other people say. I love reading books. I read tons of books. And so what I've learned though in reading a lot of different books is that you can, about the same topic. And each
Mhm.
book, it gets you to the same ending, but generally the process will be different. Each person is, they figured out their own process. And I very much like that approach. I like the thing of going, okay, it's kind of like learning guitar. Like I learned how to play guitar. I'd say the majority of my style, probably up until I was 30, was completely based around Paul Gilbert and Richie Kotzen. Their techniques were fully what I did, right? But the thing is that I didn't sound like a clone because those guys are so talented. But basically everything I did was one of their styles,
Mhm.
And but then when I started really branching out and just I stopped studying people and I started just doing my own thing, I really liked where I started going. And the reality is that even though I had a fine career up until I was 30, my real career didn't start until I was after 30. And when I listen back to the stuff that I did in my 20s, it's fine. To me, it doesn't sound very unique, right? But then when
Mhm.
I start listening to the stuff that I did in my 30s, and it was kind of like where I kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I know this stuff. I don't need to keep focusing in on learning it. Now I'm just going to start doing it. It took me a long time to get to that point. But, when I listened to the catalog that I started creating in my 30s, I really started liking that guitar player a lot more. And while I didn't spend as much time on the technique stuff, I really spent a lot of time on building the sounds and on creating layers. And I really liked that. I like listening back to that stuff, still. And I think that was kind of like the catalyst for going, oh, okay, I can take stuff and now I can really make it my own. And that's very much the same way that I approach everything now. Anything that I read or learn, or even like learning the online business world and stuff like that, and whatnot. There's a lot of books out there and experts who've done really well, and yeah, you can learn that stuff from them. But I think it's good to learn the principles, and
Mhm.
then at that point, I think you have to make it your own because it's like songwriting. Songwriting, you can follow these rules, but it's not going to be authentic. And the reality is, I think people hear that. And it's the same thing in how you're approaching, when you're talking to people as a teacher, putting together online programs and stuff. Yeah, you can follow all the pre-written stuff that people have out there, or you can just do your own thing and speak in your own voice and speak to your audience the way that they need to be spoken to.
Do you feel like in your 20s, like especially you think it's like you're almost following a model of like, this is what I've got to do. And then 30s ends up being kind of like making that transition to like, well, what do I want to do? And like, how do I want to be like,
Yeah,
that's not me. It's like you start to get comfortable in your own skin and you're like, this is me. And it's no longer kind of like, I've got to look like this and do this, but like, you know what? I like me
yeah.
and I'm going to start. And then that, if you're doing that personally in your own expression, that's going to come through in your playing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's just a matter of building confidence, complete confidence. And when I turned 30, I had already done quite a bit guitar wise, and so I felt very confident in my career then at that point.
Mhm.
And at that, but the reality is I was following. I was just kind of going through the motions of this is what you're supposed to do. And yeah, when I turned 30, I remember the day that I woke up. I felt like a new man, and I was nervous. I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna 30. I'm gonna feel like an old guy." But I woke up and I still remember that morning thinking like I've finally arrived. Now I can just do me because I was always, for whatever reason, I was the young guy in the group. Like when I was hanging out in studios, and even when
Mhm.
I produced my first record in Nashville, and then continued a producing career at 25, which is pretty young. And so I was always the young guy. And then when I moved to Los Angeles, now here I was playing guitar on a bunch of TV shows and stuff like that. I was still the youngest guy in those sessions. So I felt that, I'm just going to shut up and sit in the back corner and hear all these older people who are much more experienced than me. I'm not going to offer my opinion. I'm just going to do what's expected. And when I turned 30, I just felt like that age gave me freedom, to now go, okay, now I'm going to do what I want to do. And Yeah, I think interesting when you realize that, but when you really analyze it, but I think it just came down to two things: probably having a big confidence shift, like a big mindset shift, and then the
Hmm.
other thing too is also just having a lot of respect for those who'd been down that road multiple times. And that was probably the best thing that I did in my 20s was just sit on the couch. I spent most of my 20s in a studio, so I would just sit on the back of at the back of the room on the couch, and I would shut up, and I would just listen to what all these people who had, been in the business, 10, 20, 30 years, I'd listen to what they all had to say. And I just was a sponge to their information.
What was it like living in Nashville and then making that move to LA,
I was,
making that jump?
oh God, I hated Nashville at that point. So I was so thrilled. I went from living in a 2-story, 2-bedroom townhouse. I'll tell you an interesting experience that I had when I left Nashville. I could not get out of Nashville fast enough in the early 2000s. I hated the last couple of years I was here, and I remember like about a week before I left, I had this townhouse. I was up on a hill. I had a really nice view. I was on this corner lot, so I had this really like almost like a 270-degree view. And this guy, I ordered pizza. I was with this girl that I was dating at the time, and this guy, pizza guy, came up, and I remember I had a cool dog and all this stuff. I had all these things that I wanted when I first moved to Nashville. And I remember I was standing on the front deck, and the girl I was dating, she was running back to the kitchen to go get my wallet, and he was standing there with the pizza. And I remember he was like looking in through the townhouse that I had, and it just caught me for a second. I realized like, wow, he looked like a musician. And I was like, that was me, 4.5 years ago. I used to work with all these guys, and I'd go to their houses who are successful musicians. I think, oh man, I would love to have this, and and whatnot. And at that point, I had a new car, and this pretty girlfriend, and I remember it just hit me. I was like, I got everything that I wanted when I came here. It just hit me,
Yeah.
and I was so thankful that, oh wow, it took 4.5 years, but I realized I did what I wanted to do. I should have left a couple of years earlier, but I did what I wanted to do, and I got what I wanted. So when I moved to LA, I was so happy to move to Los Angeles that I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment that was probably like 800 square feet, and I lived there with 4 other guys. And 3 of those guys, probably about 4 months into living there, 3 of those guys, like their girlfriends moved in. So there were 6 people living in one room and 2 of us living in another. And I remember one night it was so I moved there in June of 2003, and I remember it was December of 2003. I remember I woke up one day and I counted 13 people staying in that apartment, and it was ridiculous. But I was so happy to be out in Los Angeles, and I was so happy to be a part of that community and doing what I was doing. That it was night and day difference lifestyle, because it was so expensive to live out there, and and whatnot. But I was so happy. I was so happy to be a part of that, and even in the ridiculousness of that lifestyle, I think that lasted a total of, I think, like 9 months before my buddy and I moved out and we got a 3-bedroom place. But that madness for like those 9 months, I was just so thankful. And I remember I would drive back from Pasadena
Hmm.
quite often, back to the valley. I lived in Sherman Oaks at the time, and I remember every time I'd be driving out on the 210 to the 134, you had this view off to the south where you could see like the buildings of Los Angeles way in the distance, and I remember every time I'd see that, I just think, man, I'm so happy to be here.
There's something that you said when you were like, oh, I should have left Nashville earlier. Do you feel now you realize when doors should close and you close them happily and not feeling like it has to be this like, oh God, I hate it here and I'm closing it. But it's like you can close a door and be like, man, that was really good.
That's a great question, actually. Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. Knowing when that door closes and when the right time, I think that's just going to come through age and experience, you
Yeah.
know? But I think you're 100% right, because it was the same thing with Los Angeles. I stayed in LA till I hit my 9-year mark, and I'm thankful I did. But the last, I'd say, year and a half that I was there, I was just like, it's time to go. I've built it up. I'm doing some cool stuff, but it's time to leave. It's time to get back to a different lifestyle. And the cool thing is that was 2010. The cool thing is technology allows us to do everything we need to do from wherever. And, I remember I went I lived down the street from a coffee shop, and I walked into this coffee shop one night, and I actually just did the math. So I think a lot of people don't really sit down and do the math, but I sat down and I did the math on what I was spending. I had a studio that I rented. I had a 3-room facility that I rented. I had an apartment that I rented, and then I had a storage unit. And, all that stuff adds up, especially when you don't own any of it. It's just money is thrown out. May as well just drive down Ventura Boulevard and throw money out the window, every month, because that's what it was. And I sat down and I did the math on what I was spending per month on stuff that I didn't own. And then I started doing the math on what I could do if I moved somewhere else and bought a house, and added in my mortgage. And I did the best math I could do at the time. And then I added in flying back to LA 3 to 4 times a year, the flights, and then staying at a hotel for a week, renting a car, and eating food. And the numbers worked in the favor of leaving. And the thing is that the majority of the people at that time that I was working with, I would see them once every 3 or 4 months. Even the composers that I was working with, at that point, I would do stuff remotely for them sometimes. So when it came down to like writing for TV, I was only seeing the people I was working with, like I said, every couple months. And then even with a bunch of the composers, what's interesting is after I left, a couple of the composers that I was working for, which was a big part of my income as well at the time, they also moved. So it was very interesting. There was like a pretty good exodus, I feel, at least in my circle, from Los Angeles. I'd say from like 2011, 2013. And, I don't think anyone's career suffered.
Now, especially when you said I did the math, and that's another thing that I feel, as you said, people don't do, or sometimes it's the thing, I don't think it can be done. Well, did you actually write it out? Did you actually look and see if it's possible? Because most of the time, it's pretty possible.
It is.
Yeah. And when you actually work it out. Now, when you were in LA, you said 9 years, and I feel like you correct me if I'm wrong. So you started out as like a studio musician. So you did a lot of guitar work. How did you get into the idea of essentially, building your catalog for sync licensing? For people that don't know, that's like music for television, commercials, film. How did you start to build that and know what people were looking for?
I started building that when I was in Nashville, because when I was in Nashville, I came to Nashville really with the mindset of, starting a band, writing, I was always pursuing the record label. So, I left Nashville in 2003 to go out to LA to, same thing, start a band and get that type of traction, which it's very difficult to start something original in a music industry town, because the great players that you want to work with are all out on other gigs. But I had written a lot of songs when I lived in Nashville. I came here with like an old VS 880, which is an old digital recording machine, and then I upgraded to Pro Tools. And when was that? That was probably around like 2001. So I had a lot of material, and I was constantly writing. So I already had a good batch of songs that I was always taking to publishers and working with other writers here and whatnot, and they were fully produced. And I always just never got the publishing deal. But at the same point, what I was writing wasn't really fit for Nashville either. So I moved out to LA already with a catalog, and then when I got there, of course, I was I was focused on working with other people and whatnot. So whenever I'd meet other songwriters and this and that, I would get together and write with them, and I'd produce the track. And I was on a mission to get a career going. I wanted to get a publishing deal, and ideally, I wanted to play with some type of group that I could have a large artistic creative say in. But at the same point, I was also producing and this and that. I was producing some other artists. So right off the bat, I hit the ground running. I was definitely I landed some gigs playing on some shows, some TV shows, but I was hustling and networking, and I wasn't just sitting around at all. So that was a big thing. And then, one of those opportunities, I was playing on a show, and then when the opportunity was right, I talked to the music supervisor. I didn't really know what they did, but as I was talking to them, I learned what they did. I just asked her if I could give her some music, and she said, yeah, I'd love some. So the next time I saw her, I gave her a CD of like 9 or 10 songs, and literally within 2 weeks or so, I had a featured vocal placement on that particular show. And it was a popular show on CBS. And man, it paid great. and it just kind of knocked me off my socks. I mean, I was just like, what is this? This was easy. Oh my gosh, I've been like beating my head against the wall for years trying to get publishers to do anything with my music. And now I give one lady an album and I get a song. Like I can tell all my friends back in New York, hey, watch this episode. I'm going to have a song. And it wasn't just a little clip. It was like 2 minutes and like 22 seconds or 2 minutes and 17 seconds. And it was kind of like a featured vocal, and right off the bat, it was just a great experience. And the whole thing was just a great experience. Getting paid was great. And the contract was easy. It was like, a page and a half. And so I thought, wow, this is interesting. And so then I gave her some more songs and that's how it started rolling. And then, I was always going out and networking and I was going out to events. And so I'd see her at an event, like a month later, she'd be sitting next to another one of her music supervisor friends. Oh, so-and-so, this is Michael. I just used one of his songs on an episode this past month. And you should give her one of your CDs. Oh yeah. So I'd take her card and, on a Monday, if this was like on a weekend, on a Monday, I'd reach out and, hey, I meet you this weekend with so-and-so. And yeah, here's my address, send anything you have. That's literally how it went. And, so it was like literally so funny, doors being slammed in my face going down one avenue and just slight pivot and like doors opening wide open.
I was going to say, it's funny, after all those years of being like, hey, publisher, you interested? No. And then suddenly, yeah, hand me a CD. It's like, just like that? Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just hand me a CD.
Yeah. But I think a lot of it played, there was a lot more to it. It's like, it sounds easy and it was, but you can't forget that, like, here I was now, I was, 28, 29. I was actually, let's see, how old would I be? Yeah, I was just about to turn 29. Just about to turn 29. I mean, think about that. And I had been, playing guitar, like obsessed with the guitar, since I was 12, so for the, previous, what is that, 17 years, right? Becoming a better guitar player, building up my guitar gear. I never got crappy gear. I always spent the money. I got good gear. And then, since I was 16, being obsessed with recording, and then going to a school for recording. And then also, in the first couple of years I was in Nashville, I was working as an assistant to an engineer and producer. So I was, when I handed them my songs, they were record quality. I really built up every aspect of the skill set. So it wasn't just the doors swung wide open. It was like the doors swung open because the quality was there.
It's like the 10,000 hours were on that CD, where it was just like, that was the time that you put into it. Because sometimes maybe folks do it and they think the process is going to be easy. And if it's, when people say, if it doesn't happen in a year, it's like, well, you can't say a year.
No.
It's just like, you can't say like a year or two or give yourself this, where are you getting this timetable anyway? It's just like, you kind of have to trust the process and do the work and show up. Even when some days you're like, but I don't see anything. You kind of have to trust that there are things happening. You've got to keep on going, because if you don't, there's someone else that's down the line that's like, you know what? I'm just going to keep on going.
Yeah.
And guess what? They get there. And it's like, how?
Yeah.
I just did the work.
That's, it's funny because I have people say like, oh, you're so lucky. I'm like, I'm not lucky. I just stayed in the game. That's it. I just stayed in the game. When other people were willing to quit and give up and move on, I stayed in the game. And that's all it boils down to. But I will go back to the idea of like the quality of the music. I run, an online program where I teach people how to, get their songs on TV. And it's really not that difficult. But I have to say that I do get a lot of messages from people who are like, man, I've been trying to get my songs placed for years and I don't ever hear back from anyone. And when someone says something like that to me, I don't hear back from anyone. I think, okay, there's two reasons why. A, your email, your approach, whatever you're doing, your phone call, whatever it is turning them off. So that's the first thing. Or two, your music's not good. So I always ask, I'm like, send me what you sent them. Like, I want to see, I want to get an idea of it. And I would say 100% of the time, it's their music is not even at demo level yet. I'm serious about that. Or maybe they did spend money with like the local guy who can record their music. Oh, I spent $1,000 per song with the local producer who does all the local bands.
Ugh.
That doesn't mean anything. It's like, who cares? Anyone can buy Pro Tools and call themselves the producer, right, in town. But I listen to their music and it's like, do you realize like nothing's even in time? The drums aren't even grooving. The guitar strumming is not in time. The vocals are out of tune. So even if it was recorded well, the production is horrible. And you have to realize that, look, when you're getting into the TV world, a perfect example would be like I watch a lot of those Hallmark Christmas movies. We'll put it that way. And it's kind of like if anyone who's listening to this, if you ever watch some of those Christmas movies, you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the acting is just really, 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 really bad. Really bad. Like so bad it's kind of laughable. The timing. It's just the acting is bad. Well, that's not the kind of acting that you're going to see on a blockbuster movie or a big TV show where they spend millions of dollars, millions and millions of dollars, not only just on the production but also on the promotion. Right. And there's a level there. There really is a fine line between the two. It's not even a fine line. I think it's a pretty thick line. Below that line is kind of the lower quality, goofy, movies like that you can tell they're low budget. And then of course above that are the high budget, high ticket stuff where like even the CGI and all that stuff, it just looks so good. You believe you're on another planet, even though it was filmed with a green screen behind them and stuff like that. Right. And it's the same thing with music. If you want to play at that level, your music has to be at that level. But I think the majority of musicians don't realize that they treat their music like a hobby. They don't really put the time and energy into creating that great product. And then they wonder why nothing happens to them. Well, you treated your business like a hobby. So what happens with hobbies? Well, have you ever made money on a hobby? I mean, golf is a great hobby for a lot of people. Most of those people, like 99% of them, don't make any money with their golf. They spend a lot of money going out and playing golf. You only have that small percentage who decided that they're going to make that hobby a career, and they then they become these golf professionals. You can look at that with anything, right? And music is no different. If you're going to treat your music like a hobby, don't be surprised when you're spending a lot of money and you're not getting any money back. It's like going golfing once a week and being like, I can't believe I'm not on the PGA Tour. Well, you went golfing once a week.
What you're saying right now, my friend Trevor, who is one of the CEOs of Soundstripe in Nashville.
Yes.
He was like, that's how he was like, my band is like a business. And he was like, all the people I was in a band with, we got that. And we were all starting businesses on our own too. When we were on tour, we all had our laptops working at it. And it has to be a business. And also too, with licensing, I feel some people have this like cheesy aspect when they think of licensing. And it's like, well, what aspect are you they almost write it as like a blow-off song. Like, it's like, oh, it doesn't have to be good. And it's like, really? It's like, it absolutely has to be good. And it's like, and it's got to be authentic. If you're saying like, this feels like Imagine Dragons, it better fucking feel like Imagine Dragons. Yeah. It shouldn't feel like, like this poorly out of time song. And I feel, so from licensing your music and all the things you're talking about too, you made a pivot too to start going into educating others in this world and just starting to branch out and create your own business. And how did that start? Well,
that was a slow climb because that actually started in the later 2000s. I'd say like in hindsight, it's interesting. It's always interesting to look back at things in hindsight and go, oh, this was really kind of starting to manifest itself 10 years ago. I think it was 2009, 2010. It could have even been 2008. But I started getting asked to speak at these producers conferences in Los Angeles by a company called Propellerhead. They make a program called Reason. And Propellerhead hosted these producers conferences in these different music cities throughout the country. And they would have different experts come in to talk about different things. And I've been a Reason user since 2003. There's a bit of a history there. I said earlier I had a 3-room facility that I rented for a number of years. Well, I always had a studio there, but I ended with this particular 3-room facility that I had there. I had an old Trident 70 series console, and it was a cool little room. It was a great place to have meetings, by the way. At that point, Reason was just a MIDI program, and they were starting to get into the audio aspect. So they created a program called Record. And some of the designers were coming to America to talk to different users, and so I was one of the users that they wanted to speak to. So they came to my studio. One of my best friends is a great drummer, and so we recorded drums a lot in the drum room. And so I was just kind of going through some of the stuff on how real producers would use this program and this and that, and some of the little things they needed to fix, especially when it came to stuff like that. Well, ultimately they integrated Record into Reason, and it became a full audio MIDI production program. But it started there. That's how I connected with them, and then they started having me speak at their conferences. And I remember in the very first one that I spoke at, I was one of the last guys. And all throughout the day, these guys were talking about like, oh, the new thing. I think they just come out with a thing called the Alligator, and they're like, oh, you can do this and that, and blah 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 blah, and you can do this so quickly. And I was just sitting there watching, and throughout the day, I started seeing these guys just kind of start to fall over in their chair and get tired and doze off. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're going to be so tired by the time I speak. What am I going to do? And I got up there and it was probably like 6 o'clock. I had a later session, and I could tell a lot of these people just weren't there. They weren't present. They just wanted it to be over. And one of the very first things I said to them was, hey, listen, so you learned today how to use all these cool programs that, when you wake up at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, how can you get that idea quickly? And you've learned how, all these new things, Reason will allow you to do that. But what I want to show you is when you wake up again at 9 o'clock, I want to show you how to deposit those songs into your bank account. And I said that line, and I literally watched every head pop up and give me their full attention during the next 45 minutes. And I just spoke about licensing, and that's when I realized, oh wow, that was really interesting. It really caught their attention. I had no plan on teaching this at all. And then a year later, I did the next one, and then as just kind of word got out, I started getting asked to speak at these different conferences. So I was flown back to Nashville to speak at a different conference, and etc. So then I ended up moving back to Nashville, a couple years later. And then when I was here, different publishers started asking me. They started hearing about this guy who's had these placements, and I'd go meet with them. And funny enough, they were people who I'd met with years before with my songs, and they turned me down, and now they want to learn. And it was just really interesting. A lot of the people that blew me off years ago then suddenly wanted to learn what I was doing. And then it kind of turned to artists, artists. And these weren't necessarily independent artists. These were some pretty well-known artists. They'd reach out and want to, pick my brain and stuff like that. And it was always to pick your brain. Can I pick your brain? Can I pick your brain? And I thought, this is cool. I just moved back to town. This will open up some doors for me. I'll get some gigs playing guitar with these guys. I'll be able to write with them, etc. Blah, 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 blah. So I did that. And then after a couple of years of that, I just got tired of it because it would turn into these 4-hour long conversations. And I realized that even though I would meet with a lot of people, let's say if I'd meet with 50 people, only 2 of them would actually move forward with something. And it really became a waste of time. So I wrote a little ebook. It was the summer of 2017, and I was just done with it. Said, anytime someone sends me an email or a publisher wants to get together and, buy me lunch, screw them. I'm just going to send them the ebook. If they have any questions, they can call me later, and I'm going to charge them. I don't have time for this because it was really eating into my time and into my production time, and I wasn't getting any value out of it, in the long run. What I was expecting to come from it wasn't coming from it. So the reciprocation aspect. So I did this ebook, and then I did a session for this guy in the fall of 2017. A friend of mine, a producer friend of mine, asked me to play guitar on 2 songs for this artist he's producing. They came to my studio and we took a break, and the artist said, so tell me a little bit about yourself. I said, I just had my 2000th placement this month. And he said, oh, have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, I have a little book. I'll send it to you. And he goes, no. Have you ever thought, I love that, but have you ever thought about doing a course? And I said, oh, there's no way I'm going to do a course. And it turns out that individual is a guy named Bill O'Hanlon, who you know. But for those who don't, Bill is a very prolific author. He's written 38 books. He's also done really well online. And in the online world, there's a guy named Jeff Walker who teaches a particular process, and Bill is a big part of that and speaks at his conferences. And so I had no idea who was sitting on the couch in my studio, but we became fast friends. And over the next couple months, we'd get together and for lunch every month. And he kept pushing me. He's like, Michael, you got to share this with people. You got to put together your program. You can reach people way outside of Nashville and all these other communities. And as he was explaining it to me, it really started making sense. I thought, yeah, I guess you're right. I guess I could do that. And he's like, you film it once, you give all the information, and then, you don't have to always stop what you're doing. And that really appealed to me. So I did that, and I created the program. And when I created the Master Music Licensing course, I created it with the mindset of, this is going to be a one and done thing. I'm going to do every single thing that I know about licensing is going to be in this program. And I did it with the mindset of, so that no one has to contact me again. and really, that's what I delivered. It's been running for a couple of years now. It's fantastic. But it really is 100% of the licensing process. And what I've realized, though, is that and I've added to it, since I initially created it, I find out like some little things that people have questions about that don't necessarily relate to licensing, but I know they have those questions because, they ask them a lot, but they're confused because, they're so used to the music industry path, and the licensing path is different. So they're asking about stuff that doesn't relate, and so I've added additional, videos, and then I realized, okay, now people are getting their songs licensed, but now the next step is, contracts. So I ended up last summer creating a whole contracts module where I went through over 100 contracts that I have. I read through all 100 of them, and I picked out 5 that covered every aspect and everything that they would ever get when it comes to licensing, both good and bad. And so it's funny because just that one module took me just as long to create and film than it did for me to film the entire program. But it, to me, again, it's one of those things where I just wanted to create something that's like, I wanted to look at it as like, this is your bachelor's degree on licensing. You don't really have to go anywhere else. You can, of course, but you don't have to go anywhere else. This will give you every little thing that you need, every detail, everything you're going to come across when it comes to licensing, the exact system that I've used, like nothing's left out. And so it really became a thing that came about over the course of many years of speaking at conferences, and then having one person say, you create a course out of this, because I didn't even know that was something I could do.
It's interesting with all of that because I feel this is now a season of like self-education.
Yeah.
This is the time where I think people are going less and less to college because it means a little less. It doesn't mean the same as it did.
Yeah.
Like, unless you're going to be a doctor, if you're going to, to law school. But other than that, it doesn't feel the same as it was, or is the same that it was 50 years ago. And people are like, $200,000 for one, or I could pay $3,000 for something that I'm totally interested, that's going to give me value and action steps.
Mm-hmm. And I'll take it one step further. With the online programs, you actually learn from experts. But when I released the program, I did a lot of research on what else was out there in the licensing world, and there are colleges who teach it. In fact, it's funny to me. So I go and I do some research. I'm like, the person who's teaching it's never had a song. They don't know what they're talking about. They may have uploaded a song to Jingle Punks and then they found that they got a license, and that's not song licensing. Okay, you got lucky. You got a song on Pawn Stars. Who cares? That's not. So my whole approach to sync licensing is consistent placements. Look, every single person here listening, if you want to get your song on a TV for bragging rights, so you can go into work and brag to your friend, that's easy. That is not hard. But the reality is that process, you're not going to make great money on it, and you're not going to turn it into a living. My process is all about creating a continuous passive income stream or royalties on a consistent basis. And the big phrase that I use through the whole program is, the phrase that I have really for my whole career in licensing is that a quality catalog is a magnet for placement opportunities. It starts there. You have to have good songs. If you don't have good songs, then you're not going to be able to play at a higher level. But that's like anything with the music industry, and that requires work. It requires investing time into writing the song. And if you can't record it yourself, it requires investing money with someone who can record it and record it well for you. But the reality is that when you have high quality music, you get paid high quality, money for the license. And then also when you get some nice placements, you get the back end. And you also have to think of internationally. You get the international royalties, and every single time that show airs, you're getting paid. And that's fantastic. And we don't want to just do that one time. You can do that once and you can make, a couple $100 or a couple $1,000, depending on the size, the type of placement, right? But you can do that once and that's fine. That's not hard. But we want to do it on a consistent basis. We want to do it so that you're getting a couple placements a month, even a couple placements a week, because then that way everything compounds itself over time. The new songs that you're getting placed this week are paying you upfront fees, but yet at the same point, all the songs you have in your back catalog that are being played this week and this month on all the different reruns of those shows all throughout the world are all generating back-end royalties for you. So the goal is consistent placements, and it's so that's what I created. I created a process that allows you to create consistent placements, and it's a process that I created for myself back in the early 2000s. That I've changed it over time as technology has caught up. When I started, we were sending out CDs, and now everything is digital. But at the same point, nothing's really changed though in the licensing world. I'd say in 7-8 years. And when it does, I'll update the program, of course. But at the same point, when it comes to this, getting back to the college aspect, another big thing that's important to me and why I love the online world so much is that when I stop licensing my music, that's when the licensing program is going to shut down. There's no way I'm going to teach people how to do something that I'm not currently doing. And I feel that that's something that's valuable, and that's something you get from a lot of the people who are doing the online programs. But you don't get that from the people who are teaching at the colleges. Oftentimes, there are people who did not do it. They learned from a textbook and they teach that textbook, and so they never did it, and then they're definitely not doing it. And so I feel that there's a massive value to the online world. And I think the only thing that's probably going to change moving forward in the online world is most likely a recognition of the online world, and then even the various online classes creating certificates, like you've been certified, and those certifications being recognized. I think that's definitely going to be coming in the future. But yeah, I love teaching online. I love being able to reach so many people, and especially even with the pandemic, a lot of my students were able to, while their gigs ended or their jobs ended, I had a number who got some, big commercials, and so those big commercials that pay multiple 5 figures were able to carry them through, the first couple months of the pandemic, and then of course, if they've done the work and had the songs out there, then they can get their royalties and stuff like that, and that to me is so valuable and exciting.
Now, if folks want to get a hold of your book and they want to know more about the class, where can they find you?
You can download the book for free at mastermusiclicensing.com, and that's where you can learn everything about the program. The program is available there, and then but I would always recommend just starting off with the book. The book is called The 4-Step Plan to Licensing to Success. It gives you a nice overview of the process. It'll take you about like an hour to read. It's not super in depth, but what's interesting about it is if you're coming from the music world, the traditional music industry path, this book I think it's going to open your eyes to if you've tried licensing your music before. Let me put it this way: if you've tried licensing your music before and it hasn't worked for you, download the book. I promise you, the answer for why it hasn't worked for you will be in that 4-step process. It's most likely because you did not follow the process. The music industry world is a 2-step process. We finish our song and then we send it out, and then oftentimes just hope for the best. Hope, terrible strategy, by the way. I don't necessarily know how much hope the hope strategy works out for people, but that's generally what we do, and that's what a lot of musicians do when it comes to licensing. They finish a song and they send it out. And they go, "Well, I never heard back." Of course you did. Of course you did. You didn't send out anything of value. And when you learn the 4-step process and what you have to create, because you have to keep in mind that the people who are using your music don't work in the music industry. They're film editors, they're re-recording mixers, they're directors, they're producers, and just to give you an idea of how this changes, I'll just give you a little nugget. In music, we mix music in stereo, left and right. But when you watch TV or go to a movie, what are you listening to audio in? Listening to audio in surround sound, 5.1, 7.1. So right off the bat, your delivery aspect has to be different. Doesn't mean you have to go back and remix your music, not at all. You just have to create certain mixes for these individuals so that they can use your music and utilize it in a surround field, right? So if you've just been sitting off your stereo mix and no one's gotten back to me, I'll tell you right now, you're missing step 2 of the process. That's it. It's that simple. It's a simple thing you can do, but you're missing that part of the process. So if you're missing that part of the process, you're not even getting to steps 3 and 4, I promise you. And it's a 4-step process. And if you want to get your songs licensed, believe me, that is every song that you're hearing on TV, whether the composer knows it or not, recognizes it or not, they're taking it through that 4-step process.
Well, go download the book. Michael, your journey, your process, the whole conversation. Thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.
I am insanely pumped because over 600 songwriters have made the commitment to themselves that 2021 is going to be the year that they're going to improve their guitar skills so they can up their songwriting game. That's right, the Songwriting for Guitar Bootcamp has kicked off. And if you're listening to this and you're like, what? I didn't know about this. Well, don't worry. It is going on right now. All you have to do is go to songwritingforguitar.com, sign up. You can jump in. This is going to be a transformative and informative, my favorite types of formative, I should say, experience. So if you are ready to break old habits, if you want to start tracking your guitar for songs, if you want other people to pay you to start tracking guitar, arranging guitars, if you want your confidence to go to new levels, this is for you, and it's free. All you got to do is go to songwritingforguitar.com. And that does it for this week's episode. It was edited and produced by Chris Fafalius. I'm Mike Myers. Thanks for listening.